And while you're turning there, let me just say welcome one more time. I'm really glad that we all get to be together every week. And I know we have several visitors with us, and so I'm glad that you guys have chosen to come and worship with us this morning. Here is my premise for this morning. Idolatry is bad. I'm not sure if you knew that. Idolatry it seems like it's condemned on every page of the Bible, or at least every other page. This is a major theme through the whole Bible. You especially can't make it through the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Hosea and Micah and those guys, without having this anti-idolatry rhetoric just shoved in your face all the time. It's in the Ten Commandments. It is all through the book of Deuteronomy. It's a theme in the book of Acts. Paul talks about idols in his letters to the churches. The 1 John ends with little children, keep away from idols. The whole book of Revelation, you could argue, is about idolatry. Idolatry is a major, major theme in the Bible. And it's bad. That's the whole idea. So, my own personal morning devotions for the last several months have been in the book of Jeremiah. I've been doing it about 3 months, and just yesterday I finished chapter 9, so making good progress. And so far, it's been a lot about idolatry. So it's like every morning I'm waking up and I'm reading another passage about how idolatry is bad and we shouldn't do that. And morning after morning, I'm being faced with this question: what does that have anything to do with me? What does this stuff about idolatry have anything to do with my own life? So I'll show you a couple of examples, things that I've come across in my own study in the last few months. Jeremiah 2. As a thief is shamed when caught, so the house of Israel shall be shamed. They, their kings, their officials, their priests, and their prophets, who say to a tree, "You are my father," and to a stone, "You gave me birth." And I'm thinking, but I don't say to a tree or to a stone anything. I don't talk to trees. Maybe, I don't know if you do. I don't talk to trees or to stones, let alone say that they're my mother and father. Jeremiah 8. For the sons of Judah have done evil in my sight, declares the Lord. They have set their detestable things, that is, idols, in the house that's called by my name, the temple, to defile it. And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it even cross my mind. And so I read something like this and I think, I don't burn, it's chapter 7. I don't burn my children in the fire, and it doesn't come into my mind either, although sometimes. But, no, so I read this, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't talk to trees, I don't talk to stones, I don't offer sacrifices of my children to anything. And so what does that have anything to do with my own life? Is this just something irrelevant? And it's like every day I'm having to think about this. What does idolatry have to do with me? I want to show you a picture. This is a figurine that was recovered at Ras Shamra, which is a site in what is today northwest Syria. You can see this on display at the Louvre Museum in France, in Paris. This is 1500 to 1300 BC, and it is a Canaanite deity known as Baal, or Baal. When Jeremiah and Isaiah and Hosea and all the other ayahs condemn idolatry, this is what they're thinking about. People have these things in their homes. They have these things on their mantles. They have little shrines in their city. That's kind of the central city shrine where they worship their different deities. And so when I read about idolatry, I know this is what they're thinking about. And so if I'm just going to sub it out, well, that's not my idol. My idol is success, or my idol is fame or power or whatever. Would they even understand what I was trying to say by saying, no, my idol is something immaterial? Here's where I think the problem is. Idols in the ancient world were physical, material tangible, and even humanoid. And I know that there are places in the world where that still happens, but in the modern West, I don't think I know anybody who bows down to a statue like this. And so is it still idolatry if there's not a tangible idol to hold? Idolatry also is practiced in discrete moments of time. I'm going to wake up this morning and I'm going to say my prayer to Baal. Or after lunch, we're all going to get together. We're going to have a festival to Asherah or whatever, all these other deities. There's a particular moment where we worship these other gods. But if my idol is something like power or money or opiates or whatever, then I don't have a moment where from 11:30 to 12 we're going to be worshiping power. We don't do that. And so is it still idolatry in any kind of sense that the biblical writers would recognize? And here I think is the big one, and this is what's really given me the most grief as I've been thinking about this for the last several months. And still don't really have a great answer, by the way. But Sunday comes with ruthless regularity, and so here we are. In the biblical world, idol worship was directed toward a who, a personality, a someone. And when we say that our idols are my career or fame or money or power or whatever, all of a sudden our idols are not whose, our idols have become what's. You see the difference? It's not a someone, now it's a something. And that transition, that's an important distinction to make. And that, I think, is where all of my angst has come from. And what do I do with these passages about idolatry if I'm not worshiping a different who, but now I'm worshiping a what? So, what do I do with these passages? Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to treat idolatry cheaply and just ignore that there is a substantial gap between the ancient world and my world. And just say, well, I can just brush right over that and I can just ignore it. And make the leap really easily. I don't want to do that, but I also don't want to say, well, we don't practice idolatry, and so this major theme that's on every other page of the Bible, that doesn't really apply to us or apply to me. I don't want to scrap it either. What I want to do is I want us to think about the nature of idolatry and the forms that it takes and the effects that it has. Not to try to make something that's ancient and irrelevant look more relevant, but just to show how relevant it actually is. And so we're going to spend a few weeks thinking about the topic of idolatry. And I want to start out by asking, what is idolatry? Just what is it? Not what are our idols, what do we worship, not how do you practice idolatry, not that y'all are looking for a step-by-step guide, not how do we fix it, but just what is it? What happens when we do idolatry? And to get at that, I want to look at this story in Exodus 32, which is the story of the golden calf. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this story, this is the quintessential moment of practicing idolatry in the entire Bible. Everything else that you read in the Bible that has anything to do with idolatry is just an echo of the golden calf story. And so whenever a biblical writer wants to point a finger at someone and say, you people are idolaters, he won't say it like that. He'll just describe them as though they are worshiping the golden calf. He'll bring language out of the story and say, what you're doing is really just this all over again. So this is like the meteor hitting the ocean with just massive ripples that just through the rest of the Bible. It's that kind of story. Now, let me set the scene a little bit. God has just brought his people up out of Egypt with the 10 plagues in the Red Sea. And they make a beeline to Mount Sinai. So now they're out in the wilderness. They come to Mount Sinai. And God descends on the mountain in a cloud. And he speaks the 10 commandments to the people of Israel. Which I don't know if you realize this. Have you ever seen a painting or a picture of Moses coming down off the mountain with 2 big stone tablets? And it says 1, 2, 3 in Roman numerals? Yeah. Hebrew doesn't have Hebrew numerals. But anyway... Okay, so that's not how it happens. Sorry to burst the bubble. He does come down with tablets. That does happen, but it's not the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments, God speaks directly to the people. It's in Exodus 20, if you want to check it out. But God descends on the mountain, and the first thing he says is, you will have no other gods before me. And number 2, you shall not make a graven image for yourself. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the people are terrified at the voice of God. And so they say to Moses, if we keep hearing the voice of God, we are going to die. So you go up there for us. Because if you die, it's fine. And so Moses goes up and becomes the first sort of mediator between God and his people. This is the birth of prophecy. This is the birth of the priesthood. And he goes up and gets more commands. There's more than just 10, but they're kind of an expansion on the 10. Anyway, and then Moses brings down the commands. And the people say, all that God has said, we will do. We agree, we promise, Scout's honor. Kind of thing. And it's not just that. It's the ratification of a wedding. That God and his people are now married. I will be your God, you will be my people. And then Moses goes back up on the mountain because now he needs to get the plans for how to build the tabernacle, which is very tedious reading. If you're doing some kind of read through the Bible in a year plan, you're probably coming up on Exodus. And you're going to get to Exodus chapter 25, and you're going to start reading about all the details of how to build the tabernacle, and it is boring. Have anybody read this section before? Would you agree? It is boring. I think it's meant to be boring. I think by the time you get to the end of chapter 31, you're supposed to be going, oh my goodness, this is taking forever. So that it makes sense when you turn to chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was taking forever, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So Aaron said to them, all right, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with a graving tool, and he made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So what is idolatry? It's this. This is this quintessential, this is what idolatry looks like. All other idolatry, whether it's in the Bible or in our own lives, is just an echo and a repeat of that story, of that moment right there. It's just different characters and different shapes, but it's the same story. Now, what makes this idolatry? I would argue that it is not when Aaron takes the gold, Aaron is Moses' brother, okay? It's not when he takes the gold and melts it down and shapes it into a calf that now it's idolatry. I don't think that's the case. I think it becomes idolatry when the people worship it. When they bring their offerings, their sacrifices, and they have their festival, and they play, which there's debate about what play means. Then it's idolatry. An idol is not an idol until it's worshipped. And so this is kind of my first point. Idolatry is illicit worship. That's what they do. They build an altar, they offer sacrifices, have a festival. It's worship. Idolatry is worship that is out of bounds, that is fraudulent or unauthorized. It's illicit. And worship could be the act of attributing value or worth or power to something or someone. And so they say, these are your gods who brought you up out of Egypt. They're ascribing value and power to this calf, which is interesting. How many calves are there? One. But they say, these are your gods, plural. So there's like, what's going on there? We don't have time to go down that rabbit hole, although if you want to, we could. But anyway, what was I saying? Idolatry is saying that this is the person or the idea or the God or the whatever that did this or that, when really it was the creator of heaven and earth who did this or that. It's misattributing power and worth and value to something else. And so here's my working definition of idolatry throughout the series. Idolatry is the worship of that which is not God. It is the act of ascribing worth or power or value to something that isn't God, when in reality that worth and power and value belongs only to him. It is the act of trusting in something or someone else to do what only God can do. It is the expression of gratitude, not to the rightful owner of that gratitude, but to an unworthy recipient. And that's exactly what we see in the golden calf story. They're worshiping that which is not God. Even though Aaron says, tomorrow we're going to have a festival. A festival? It's like feast and festival and fiesta all put together. We're gonna have a fiesta to the Lord. Or in Hebrew, we're going to have a festival to Yahweh. And so he looks at this golden calf and he says, that calf right there, that's the creator of heaven and earth. Worship of that which is not God. That's exactly what we do when we put our trust in material stuff to keep us safe, or in violence to bring peace, or in fame to make us fulfilled, or in power to create order, or whatever. Now, at this point, I think it is appropriate and fair to ask, who cares? Who cares if you worship an idol? Why does it matter if this guy worships that god and she worships that god or goddess? What is the big deal if this person bows down to a tree and says, you're my father, and that person bows down to a stone and says, you're my mother who gave me birth? Does that mean that the creator of heaven and earth is so fragile and so angsty that he can't handle sharing glory with anybody else because it's mine? Is he so egotistical that he can't handle anybody else having any share of his glory because all the glory belongs to me? Is that the God that we worship who's revealed in Jesus Christ? So who cares if we worship idols? Why is this such a flashpoint that it's addressed on like every other page of the Bible? Fair question. At least I think it is, and I get to ask the questions. Look at how the story goes on, because I think this is really significant. In verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, okay, so we were at the base of the mountain, there's a festival, and now we're being teleported to the top of the mountain. Okay, Lord speaking to Moses. Go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf, and they have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Sidebar, any time in the Bible you read the word stiff-necked, which it pops up from time to time, it's an allusion to this story. Okay, that's part of that meteor hitting the ocean and the waves going through the rest of the... Okay. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. So God is not happy, right, about what's happening at the foot of the mountain. He tells Moses to go down and deal with it. He says, your people whom you brought up out of Egypt. Sometimes I'll come home from work, and Katie will say, you will not believe what your daughter did today. I'm like, oh no. Because whenever it's my kid instead of our kid, something's wrong. And God says to Moses, your people whom you brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. And God gives several reasons why their actions at the foot of the mountain, their illicit worship, are a problem. And what does he say? Well, for one, they have broken their word. They have turned aside quickly from the way that I've commanded them. You remember, he descends in a cloud on the top of the mountain and he says, you shall have no other gods before me. and you shall not make for yourself a graven image. And when it's all over, the people say, all that the Lord has said, we will do. And the next time we hear from them, they're breaking the first 2 commandments. And it's like, you promised you wouldn't do this. It's not just, oh, but that glory only belongs to me. It is, we are married, and you made a vow to me, and on our wedding night, you are violating the vow of fidelity and going to somebody else. I can see why that would be irritating. And so it's not just that all the glory belongs to me. It's you promised, you said you wouldn't do this, but you have turned aside quickly from the way that I've commanded. Another reason it's wrong is that God is denied his due. He says to Moses, they have built this calf and they're worshiping it and they're saying that this calf is what brought them up out of Egypt. But it was me. I was the one who did that. And so this thing is getting praise for something I did. Has anybody ever gotten praise for something that you did and you're like, hello? I didn't put no time or effort into that. Yeah, of course, his glory that rightfully belongs to him is being given to someone who didn't do it. But then there's one more reason that God's upset over idolatry, and I think we missed this one. And I think this is really, it's because we miss this one that we don't understand idolatry. And it comes from the first verse of it, verse 7. The Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Some translations will say the people have become corrupt. There are a few translations that will say they have acted corruptly. That's not correct. It's not that their actions are wrong. It is that they have become defiled. Something is happening to them through their actions. Their idolatry does something to them. This is the same word to describe the world when God says, yeah, we need to cleanse this with the flood. That in Genesis 6, it says that the world had become corrupt. It had become so stained and ruined and destroyed by its own infatuation with violence that God tearfully comes to the decision to purify it. This is the word that's used for what God does to Sodom and Gomorrah, that he ruins it, destroys it. This is the word for what happens when a flock of locusts, a swarm of locusts, destroy a harvest. That it destroys, it ruins, it corrupts the harvest. And their idolatry has done that to the idolater. It has destroyed, it has ruined, it has corrupted themselves. See, idolatry isn't just an offense against God, although it is that. Idolatry is also egregious because of what it does to us. And because we are God's treasured possession, because we are the pinnacle of his creation, because we reflect his image, he desires what's best for us, and he knows that idolatry is not that. It is like someone who is addicted to meth, and the mother says, no more. I'm not supporting this anymore, not because it dishonors me, although it does that, but because of what it does to you. That's what I think is going on with idolatry. It does dishonor me, but really it's corrupting you. Now, the story of the golden calf does go on. That's not the end of the story. Moses intercedes for the people and says, but if you wipe them out, if you go in and just lose your mind all over the people, then what are the other nations going to think? They're going to think you just brought them out to destroy them in the wilderness. You don't want to do that. And God changes his mind, which is... God changes his mind. Can he do that? Anyway, and then so he relents and decides he's not going to bring wrath on the people. But Moses goes down and Moses sees what the people are doing and Moses brings wrath on the people. So the story does continue, but I want us to just stop with verse 10. And I want to think about this. One implication that should stick out to us is the fact that idolatry can take many different forms. If it's the worship of that which is not God, then idolatry can be the worship of literally anything except God. So, for example, idolatry could be the worshiping of figurines and humanoid deities or even animals or some kind of composite of the two. It could be bowing down to statues. That's what happens in the story, and it still happens in some parts of the world. But idolatry could also be the worship of another human, a spouse or a significant other, your children, your boss. I don't know if anybody does worship their boss. I suppose that happens. A celebrity or a public figure. If we attribute to that person what only God can provide, that's idolatry. Idolatry can also revolve around something immaterial, like control or reputation or entertainment. Or it could be something that is material, like painkillers or money or muscle cars. But if idolatry is the worship of that which is not God, then we are guilty of practicing idolatry when we worship a false image of the true God. If we worship God thinking that he is all mercy and no wrath, we are worshiping a false God. If we worship a God who is all rules and no grace, we are worshiping a false God. If we worship a God who cares deeply about abortion and homosexuality, but he is willing to let greed and inhospitality to the stranger slide, because that's not so important to him, you're worshiping a false God. If you're worshiping a God who is male, you're worshiping a false God. Idolatry can take a lot of different forms, and it can center around a lot of different kinds of gods, including distorted portraits of the true God, which is what Aaron does. He has a distorted picture. He looks at the calf and says, that is the creator. That's a distorted picture of the true God. It's idolatry. And so what that means is that you're not necessarily off the hook just because you don't start your morning by bowing down to the Ras Shamra Baal figurine. What do you believe is going to save the world? What or who gives you a sense of purpose or hope or fulfillment? Who do you want to be more like? What or whom do you credit for the good things that have happened in your life? And what do you look for relief from the bad? If the answer to any of those questions is anything other than God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, we need to take serious inventory of that. Now, what I may not realize in idolatry is that idolatry takes a toll on me. The problem that we see with idolatry in this text and over, including in Psalm 135 that Donnie read for us, we see that idolatry has an effect on the idolater. It does something to us. It changes us. It warps us. It distorts us. As God says, they have corrupted themselves, or they have become corrupt. And what it does is it warps me into the image of whatever it is that I'm worshiping. And we're going to come back to this in a couple of weeks, how people who worship the golden calf are portrayed as unruly cattle. For example, God says that I have seen this people and they are a stiff-necked people. That is a word that you use to refer to cattle that doesn't want to go into the gate. They are stiff-necked. Then we will look at we'll come back to that. But you become like what you worship. If you worship a cow, you're going to become like a cow. If you worship a blind statue, you're going to become spiritually blind. You become like what you worship. In other words, idolatry makes us less human. It corrupts us and distorts us, ruins us, and we have no capacity to fix ourselves. There is only one hope for people like us. If it's true that you become like what you worship, then how do we become more like God? Idolatry can only be resolved through right worship. If idolatry is illicit worship of that which is not God, then the only resolution is to worship the true God. And I think that this is one of the claims that the Bible is making about the human condition, that all humans are idolaters, that we all worship something or someone, perhaps ourselves or someone else or some deity or something that isn't God. And as a result, it changes us and we are unable to help ourselves out of that hole. But God in his grace came to us in the person of Jesus Christ and revealed who the one true God really is, so that we might worship him rightly. In order for us to be able to worship the one true God, we have to know who he is. And so Jesus reveals him to us. He reveals our misconceptions and sets them aright, and he exposes our love affair with our idols. The whole message of the gospel could be summarized as humans can once again be made fully human by conforming to the image of the Son, Jesus Christ. That's Romans 8. The message of the gospel is that there is hope for us to become what we were meant to be by becoming more like Jesus, which is only possible by his grace and by his Spirit. And so at the end of the series, we're going to come back to this idea of what do we do about idolatry, and how do we get past it? So with all that in mind, let me bring us to a close. The first thing that I think we need to do is acknowledge our own idolatry. We need to be able to confess the effect, the toll that has taken on us. I'm not sure that at this point this morning that we even need to start thinking about specific, like, what is my idol? I thought about asking that. I don't even think we're ready for that. I think we just need to come to terms with the fact that our hearts are prone to wander. And that we have this built-in predisposition not to glorify God. We naturally just want to kick against the goads, and something has to be done about that if we're going to be fully human. And so we begin, I think, by confessing that to ourselves and to coming to terms with that and confessing it to God in prayer. But then also we remember that there is hope for people like us. That God has not abandoned us to our own decay and just thrown us into the trash heap of history. He has come into our world to walk alongside us and to show us a better way and to share his Spirit with us. He has conquered our idolatry with his life and with his love in raising his Son Jesus from the dead. And for that we give him praise. And we ask that he would continue this work of transforming us by the power of his Spirit. Let me close this in prayer. Our God, we confess that we are prone to wander and that we don't love you the way that we should. That we love ourselves and we love our stuff and we love control and all other kinds of things. And I pray that as we're going through this study that you will expose those things to us and that you would do a work on our hearts to bring us into love with you. I pray that you would create faith in us where it's lacking. I pray that you would give us hearts of repentance and confession. God, we thank you that you've revealed yourself to us and that you are bigger than some calf or some idea or even some person. We're grateful for that. And we ask for your love and your mercy to be on us. We pray that you'll share your Spirit with us. We ask this in the name of Jesus and by the power of your Spirit. And the church says, Amen.